Welcome everybody to our webinar this month, which we are talking about emotional intelligence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan and I'm the founding partner and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. And for the last 22 years now, I've been working in learning and development and consultancy type of roles, really focusing very much on creating and developing helpful habits, positive behaviours, both at individual, team and organisational level. And I'm very much kind of coming from a scientific background. I had got a degree in psychology, which I did an awful long time ago now, it would seem. But for the last 12, 13 years, I've been actively involved in studying neuroscience and actually applied what we call kind of organisational neuroscience. So that's my kind of background. Emotional intelligence of leaders and team members is no longer something that is nice to have. It's critical to the long-term future of organisations. And according to the World Economic Forum, emotional intelligence is one of the top skills that are required for professional success. Now, yes, you can be a successful leader without much emotional intelligence. If you're extremely lucky, and you've got everything else going for you, there's booming markets, perhaps the competition isn't so great, perhaps your leadership, senior leaders aren't particularly strong leaders, then if you're incredibly smart, then you can cover for your lack of emotional intelligence until things get tough. But as soon as things start to get tough, challenging, for your organisation, for the business, at that point, leaders, people who don't have higher levels of emotional intelligence won't have built up that kind of the goodwill, the social capital, as it's sometimes referred to, that's needed to get the best out of people when we are under real pressure. And let's face it, you know, the last few years have been really quite challenging for the majority of organisations, and looking forward, it doesn't look that that's going to change anytime soon. So the art of sustainable leadership is about getting others to produce their best work consistently, and high IQ alone is not sufficient. Now, the good news is that emotional intelligence can be learned and improved at any age. And in fact, data actually shows that on average, people's emotional intelligence tends to increase with age. One of the most common complaints I hear about leaders, particularly newly appointed ones, is that they lack empathy. The problem is that they were promoted because they were outstanding individual performers, and being a solo achiever doesn't teach you the skills necessary to understand other people's concerns. People motivated to improve their emotional intelligence can do so if they're given the right information, guidance and support. Webinar, we're going to be discussing what we call the key competencies that make up emotional intelligence. We're going to be looking at the link between the Jigsaw Discovery Behavioural Framework and emotional intelligence, and how it facilitates increased understanding of the way emotional intelligence actually plays out in our everyday life. We're going to be looking at some of the potential developmental challenges, and then concluding with some kind of top tips and strategies to develop emotional intelligence and gain greater effectiveness at work and in your personal life. So in line with the science, we like to break things down into short chunks and chapters. So today we've got 4 chapters. The first one, we're going to look at what is emotional intelligence, moving on to self-awareness and the starting point. We're then going to be talking about the jigsaw and the link between jigsaw and emotional intelligence. And lastly, developing emotional intelligence. So let's start then with what is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our emotions, to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. Now, in practical terms, what this really means is it's about being aware that emotions can and do drive our behavior, which then results in either a negative or positive effect upon ourselves and or other people. It's also about learning how to regulate our emotions and manage our relationships with other people. In its simplistic form, emotional intelligence is our ability to manage ourselves and our relationships with others. Emotional intelligence is the distinguishing factor that enables an individual to have kind of wholesome, healthy, strong relationships or cold, distant contacts. It's the difference between collaboration and healthy conflict and disputes and fallouts. Emotions is especially important when we are under pressure in situations such as the one that we've got there on screen. Giving, receiving feedback. Nobody likes giving and receiving feedback. It's often quite awkward and feels uncomfortable for both the giver and the receiver. And this is situations like this is when our emotional intelligence is of particular importance, having those higher levels. A minute and let you take some time to draw upon your own experience of emotional intelligence, or perhaps lack of it, in the workplace. Now, as we've already mentioned, an important part of emotional intelligence is being able to recognise, understand and influence the emotions of others. It's about helping, supporting people to feel important, valued and respected as an individual. Every interaction and contact we have with another person will influence the health of that relationship with that person, the way they feel and respond to us. Now, what I'd like you to do is think about some of your workplace relationships, current or past, and recall times when you felt valued and respected as an individual. Times when you were left feeling like a champion. Then I'd like you to recall times when you were left feeling insignificant, perhaps more like a chump. And ask yourself, what impact did how you were left feeling have on your own emotions and your motivation to do your best work? I'm going to shut up for a few minutes, give you 3 or 4 minutes, perhaps just to have a think about that and really think about, when were you made to feel like, left feeling like a champion, really valued, respected, and when were you left feeling more like a chump? And there's some examples of things, situations on there that can give you that champion or chump feeling. So I'm going to shut up, over to you for a couple of minutes. Had a couple of minutes there just to think about some of those times when you actually were left feeling good and valued and respected as an individual, and times when you were left feeling a bit insignificant, really, not really valued at all. What kind of impact did that have with how you were kind of, your emotions, your motivation to do some of your best work? If you just want to pop your thoughts in chat for me, that would be great. Did it make to your motivation and how you were left kind of feeling, how motivated you were to do some of your best work? She was to leave, and they did. Well done, Anne-Marie, yeah. Anybody else? Be motivated, not supported as a chump. Yeah, absolutely. I was starting to see just some of the kind of effects. Anne Smith, when I felt like a chump, I went into overdrive and tried to prove myself. Yeah, And then you've got to ask yourself, at what cost was that to you, perhaps? As a champion wanted to do even more? Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we want in now, high cost. And yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're wanting even more, isn't it? That more kind of, you know, we need our teams to be at the best. So this is why emotional intelligence really is so important. Abby says our lead manager was always open and honest with any communications around change and allowed me to be proactive and left her feeling like a champion. Brilliant. That's really great. Thank you. Abby, as a champion, felt considered and empowered. Yeah, again, brilliant. Okay, so thank you for kind of sharing that with us. So it's a scientific fact that emotions precede our thoughts. And when emotions run high, they change the way our brains function, diminishing our cognitive abilities, decision-making powers, and even interpersonal skills when we're in that kind of threat kind of state. So understanding and managing our emotions and the emotions of others helps us to be more successful in both our personal and professional lives. At a personal level then, emotional intelligence helps us to have comfortable conversations without hurting feelings, become more effective and adaptive communicators. It helps us to manage our emotions when stressed or feeling overwhelmed. It helps us to improve relationships with people that we care about, to build stronger, trusting, safe relationships. And it helps us to be more agile and open to change, promoting those values of difference. And at a workplace kind of level, then emotional intelligence can help us to resolve conflicts quickly. It kind of helps to promote those healthy debates and valuing of diverse perspectives. It can engage and help us to coach and influence and motivate people, bring people along with us, help to create that culture of collaboration. And also important again today is building that psychological safety within teams. So moving on to our second chapter then, self-awareness. Self-awareness is the starting point. Now for the purpose today, we're going to be focusing upon the 4 key behavioural preferences. Now when you complete your Jigsaw Discovery profile, you create your personal behavioural map, which illustrates your preference in each of the 4 areas and highlights your flexibility to adapt and flex your behaviour, adapt your behaviour to suit different situations. Now, we all have preferred behaviours which feel more, let's say, more natural. They're often our default behaviours, which people with lower levels of self-awareness and emotional intelligence are more likely to use when they're under pressure, without really giving it any thought as to the potential impact of those behaviours, their actions, and their responses upon the situation and upon other people. Whereas people with higher levels of self-awareness understand how their behaviours and the way they respond to a situation is likely to affect others. And this is where in the Jigsaw we talk about that importance of navigating our behavioural maps, adapting our behaviours to the people and the situation, taking their needs and likely responses into account. Person practices navigating around the behavioural map, the more natural it's going to feel, leading to significant steps being taken towards developing higher levels of emotional intelligence. If you're already familiar with the Jigsaw behavioural framework, the next few slides really will be just a bit of a short recap. Or the red preference. They look at the facts, the headline data. They're rational, logical, decisive, action orientated, quite objective, don't get caught up in the emotions of a situation, very results outcome focused and quite direct, blunt speaking individuals. Now a question for you here, and again, pop answers in chat for me. What if somebody who leads with this red preference, as we would call it, what if they have got low levels of self-awareness? and emotional intelligence. How may they be perceived, do you think, if they overuse or underuse this behavioural preference? If they use this behavioural preference in the wrong situation with the wrong person, how do you think they may well come across to other people? Again, just want to pop your answers in chat for me. That would be wonderful. And rude, yeah, absolutely. Lacking in compassion, uncaring, empathetic, rude, bossy, rude, unfeeling, uncaring, absolutely. Disrespectful is another one I'd add into there. They could come across as irrational even, they could come across, they could perhaps, if they underuse it, they could perhaps miss important kind of data. They could perhaps come across as perhaps even being incompetent if they underuse or overuse in the wrong situation. So let's now turn to our yellow preference. Now, people with a higher yellow preference, they tend to be perceived as being quite bold, daring, impulsive, spontaneous, openly enthusiastic type individuals. For them, it's all about newness, novelty. They tend to be quite expressive individuals. They like stories, they tell stories, they're quite visual kind of thinkers, creative, innovative, thinking outside the box, looking for new ways of doing things, like to find the easiest way of doing things. They tend to jump from one idea to another, from one task to the next. Great starters, not always so great finishers though. Easily distracted, daydreamers, like life to be fun and enjoyable. So again, pop your answers in chat. How may they be perceived if they overuse, underuse, or use these behaviours in the wrong situation, if they have that low level of self-awareness and emotional intelligence? Thoughts how we might? Self-centered, flaky, not in touch with reality, yeah. Not taken seriously, might be seen as a time waster, as lazy, as just being all ideas and no action. They may be come across as being disinterested in other people and other people's ideas, a loose cannon, absolutely. They may they might miss to see the kind of implications of their ideas and thoughts and their behaviours on processes and on other people. To our green preference. So a green preference, focus on preserving and maintaining relationships. They don't like too much focus on just the facts. They kind of always want to take people into consideration. It's about values and beliefs that's important to them. And they believe that, you know, values and beliefs are there to be respected. They tend to be more empathetic, caring, great listeners, a fantastic shoulder to cry on. If you ever need a shoulder to cry on, find a green, caring person. They like to help and support others, and often are very kind of great team players. They're the people who beaver away in the background and just get on with it. So thinking about our green, again, if they have low levels of self-awareness and EQ, how may they be perceived, do you think? Again, popping your answers in chat for me. Actually weak, indecisive, soft touch, not dealing well with anything challenging. Yeah. Becoming visible in organisations as well. They can get passed over, not heard. They leave themselves out. Yeah, absolutely. They can be perceived as being a bit over righteous all the time. Perhaps lacking in clarity, that, you know, it's always about people rather than actually there's times when we do need to get the tasks done. They can perhaps come across as being a bit too personal, a bit too probing to some people perhaps. our blue preference, then these people like detailed information. They want all the facts, all the data that's available. They come across as being quite careful, prudent, perhaps even conservative in their approach. They tend to be organized. They like rules and policies and procedures. They won't be rushed into anything. They like to think things through, and they like to have that kind of time to think things through and to process information. And they kind of seek conformity and about maintaining order and correctness. So again, let's have a think here then about if this person has low levels of self-awareness. Yeah, Anne-Marie's already beat me to it. Pedantic, stickler, boring. Any other thoughts then? Old, yeah, rigid, absolutely. Bit of a job's worth. They can come across as disrespectful, not strategic perhaps, a bit pessimistic, closed, opinionated. It can sometimes as well actually create paralysis by analysis and detail for other people. So again, we're starting to see that real importance of why we need to be self-aware and why we need these higher levels of emotional intelligence. For a moment there, and give you some time to kind of think back, and what I want you to do is think back about a recent meeting you attended, and then I want you to answer the following questions. Just going through this in your mind. You might want to write it down, make yourself a few notes. It might be easier for you, but just answer these questions. During the meeting, so this is actually during a meeting. So think back to a recent meeting and think back to during the meeting. What actions did you actually write down? What ideas and insights did you have and share with your colleagues? How often did you provide detailed, logical arguments? Did you actually do that? And what did you do to empathize and connect with your colleagues sitting around the table? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to think about that and make yourself a few notes. So now what I want you to do is, still thinking about this same meeting, think back after the meeting when you returned to the workplace. And just think about these questions here and reflect on this. Did you actually review the discussions and information? Did you go back, play the meeting back in your mind, just to kind of gain that real clarity of information and what's actually been said and gone on in the meeting? Did you think about the actions that were agreed and how they might play out? So did you kind of look forward to the future? Actual outcomes and results of the meeting. What did the meeting achieve? What it was set out to achieve? And did you reflect upon your own feelings after the event, how those decisions actually made you feel and how aligned they were to either your own personal values or the values of the organisation? Again, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that. You reviewed a meeting through the lens of the 4 behavioural preferences and explored the degree to which you actually you will use the different preferences both during and after the meeting. Now, people with those higher levels of EQ know that importance of understanding how each of those behavioural preferences plays a part in the way they develop and build the relationships. And then they use this information to inform them more consciously as to when they should use the various preferences and how to use them, how to use them at the most appropriate time. And that's what we were getting you to do, just to think through, did you actually tap into your 4 different behavioral preferences? What did you actually do to build those kind of relationships, to adapt your style to the other people in the room, and to make sure that the meeting was as productive as possible for yourselves and your colleagues? So I'm now going to move on to chapter 3, where we're going to be looking at jigsaw and emotional intelligence. So at this chapter, we're going to look at the components of emotional intelligence, and then how the jigsaw framework, behavioural framework, can provide a kind of a practical structure for helping you to understand emotional intelligence. So we're going to start off with what we call the key components of emotional intelligence, and they break down into 2 kind of domains: interpersonal and intrapersonal. And what I'd just like you to do, and by all means, if you want to use your kind of annotates and things like that in Zoom, you can do, or if you just want to use chat, please do so. But what I'd like you to do is answer the question, do you consider yourself to be self-aware? So just quite simply put yes or no in chat is probably the easiest way of doing it. We've got quite a lot of yeses coming through there. Okay. It's fine. So the first of the components then, looking at the intrapersonal ones first of all, self-awareness is the top one there. So that's the degree to which we're able to recognise our strengths, our drivers, our emotions, our moods, our behaviours, and make realistic assessments. Now, most people, now I am going to kind of put a bit of a caveat in this, because one way and or another, most of you will be involved in learning development, HR, people, kind of sector services. So you have a little bit more of a self-awareness than the average individual. But an interesting fact that most people, if they're asked, are you self-aware, say yes. Yet research has shown us that only 15% of the population are truly aware. Just 15% of the population are truly self-aware. So I'll leave you to ponder on that one for yourself. Then, so that's the degree to which we're able to control or redirect our impulses and our emotions. It's also about how well we are at fulfilling our obligations and achieving our goals, that kind of self-control. Flexibility, the degree to which we're open to change, our enjoyment and management of variety, the degree to which we're comfortable with the unknown. Motivation, that's about the degree of energy and drive and enthusiasm to achieve a goal that we have. Achievement, the level of drive to perform well and to achieve through independent action and our own initiative. Resilience, to overcome setbacks. Self-sufficiency, not getting discouraged. And well-being, the ability to manage our stress and develop effective coping strategies. So if we then look at the intrapersonal components, there we've got empathy, the degree to which you're able to understand the feelings, thoughts and experiences of others, to understand their lived experience from their perspective rather than your own perspective. Energy, that's about our commitment and the energy that we direct towards others, the actions that you actually carry out, the level of commitment to actually getting and acting upon feedback that will then improve your actions and improve your relationships with other people. So how much energy do you put into building those relationships? How committed are you to that? Social skill, the degree to which you're at ease socially, your ability to build those relationships, to build trust and communicate effectively. Tolerance, the degree of patience that we show with others, that we actually have around their beliefs, their values, their opinions. Your ability to also maintain respect and kind of fairness and open-mindedness, even when we're disagreeing with people or during conflict type situations. And lastly, our ability to lead. That's our ability to be assertive, to offer direction, to guide, to collaborate, to bring people together. During each of these key components, you'll probably recognize that in some areas, you've actually, you feel quite accomplished. You've mastered the skills. But there's probably other areas that you say, perhaps could need to do more. They're perhaps a little underdeveloped. So, for example, just to give you an example, you may be highly motivated, highly achievement orientated, but yet you struggle when it comes to demonstrating that compassion and understanding, empathy for others. And your jigsaw behavioural profile, what that does, it actually illustrates how you're most likely to perform on each of the key components. Now, I have got to say that this is a generalism. Every brain is different. Every brain is totally unique. Even the wiring, even the parts of the brain that we use aren't always the same parts of the brain that the next person would use in a similar situation. So all we can do, and all we are doing here, is offering you insights, a guide, a framework as a starting point. Now look at each of those 4 kind of behavioural preferences again. The red preference are more likely, and I stress more likely, to have higher levels of emotional capabilities in the following kind of areas that I've shown there on screen. And as I said, it's important to be aware these are not set in stone, they're generalisms, which should be used as that starting point in identifying an individual's area of higher skill levels. And it's something that, again, within a workshop situation, we wouldn't just be making these, we'd actually get people to, they do an assessment, if you like, of each of these key kind of areas. So I'm just giving you the areas that are most likely to have higher levels in. And some of the behaviours, emotionally intelligent kind of behaviours that support these kind of key components, or show that perhaps it's a development area. People with the red preference tend to be quite realistic in their self-assessment of their abilities to achieve and to motivate, but they're often not aware of the moods and the emotional variations. They're possibly not aware of the kind of the reactions of other people, the impact, the effect they're having on other people. They have relative low impulse control, and that can result in quite kind of spontaneous outbursts and reactions. They often find it quite hard to give themselves permission to switch off and relax. They can become quite emotionally charged with any kind of, when there's lack of achievement, when people seem to be wasting time, wasting resources, messing around. They're highly independent, should I say, driven to kind of excel, to quickly master new challenges. They get satisfaction from engaging in complex problem solving, and where their competencies are really going to be kind of challenged and seen and recognised by others. Very self-sufficient, persistent, bounce back quickly, very confident in their ability that they've got what it takes to rise to a challenge, to deliver change. Less comfortable though when it comes to those emotional situations and feelings, might not show that sensitivity to others. They can be highly selective in where to invest their energy when it comes to relationship building. Competitive, focused on achievement. Yeah, can demonstrate tolerance towards people who they perceive as being competent, but can struggle with people that they don't perceive as being competent. And competent is measured in the red world as how good somebody is at delivering the result. And they're quite self-assured and confident kind of communicators with other people. So those are the kind of areas, the emotional intelligence and the links to the kind of the jigsaw there. Dark yellow, people who lead with the yellow preference, more likely to have higher levels of emotional capabilities around the areas, the components of flexibility, motivation, resilience, the ones that there are on the screen. The behaviors that we can actually see here and what we can kind of the linkage with the jigsaw again, they're quite confident in their abilities to be resourceful and innovative. They do recognize moods and how those moods may affect their actions. They can see their impulses as actually a source of direction. They recognize they can be a distraction, but actually to them having that, being able to have that kind of spontaneity, that impulsive kind of response actually can be a source of direction for them. For them, they're in danger of losing control when other people tend to be quite critical towards them, when they don't feel appreciated, when they perhaps feel isolated, rejected, or overlooked in some way. They like variety and possibility. They're open to whatever emerges so long as their personal values are respected throughout. They're motivated by opportunities for growth and innovation. They're quite resourceful when confronted with challenge. They use their social networks as to kind of a coping strategy for their well-being. They're quite energetic, innovative, problem solvers. Their enthusiasm tends to increase the more involved they are. Very at ease socially. And they use that kind of their influence, they persuade people through their relationships and their willingness to share their innovation and their ideas. And they're quite collaborative when it comes to motivating people, when it comes to leading other people. They like to kind of collaborate other people into kind of moving them towards action. To our green preference. So the areas that somebody with a higher green preference, the areas of emotional intelligence, their components there, likely to be higher in the self-awareness, regulation, again, the areas that we can see on the screen. And if we just look at some of their behaviours, well, they're quite realistic about the assessment of their own moods and emotions and the moods and emotions of others, actually. They're attuned to the emotional energy and they know how to redirect impulses, their own impulses, so they can help other people. They actually get quite a lot of emotional satisfaction from just being in quiet, what they perceive to be comfortable, supportive environments. They pursue harmony, they seek out harmony with other people. They're very good at bouncing back by renewing their focus on their values and their beliefs. They come back to their values and beliefs as a way of kind of building their resilience, bouncing back from adversity. They actually enjoy spending time with one or two close friends. And again, often that is one of their coping strategies. Very perceptive of feelings and emotions of others. They show their empathy easily. They build quite cooperative, collaborative relationships. And they really value individuals. And they work to ensure that kind of They support more than any kind of criticism. Very selective about what social occasions they attend. And they show their tolerance with a whole range of people. Very tolerant, understanding, empathetic is some of their high kind of emotional intelligence qualities. So back to our blue preference, and people with the blue preference are more likely to have higher levels of emotional intelligence in the areas again shown on screen. And those behaviors that kind of play out in these areas are they've got confidence about their own perceptions of that they believe their own perceptions are very realistic and that their ideas are very logical. They're often unaware of the impact that their behavior can have on other people. They focus much more on tasks rather than emotions and feelings. They're often quite detached, and they kind of almost experience the situation as an onlooker because they kind of tend to step back from a situation, remain detached from a situation, whilst they're making sense of what's going on and the information that's available. Very good, and perhaps actually this is a almost too good to a danger area of controlling their impulses. They suppress their feelings and emotions, which can be good in the right situations, but sometimes can be very bad as well. We have to be very careful when it comes to suppressing our feelings. It's not a long-term strategy at all. They're well organized, very kind of, they show their commitment through their fulfilling their obligations. They're very dependable, sincere. They actually gain satisfaction from that, having that attention to detail and the precision, doing a good job. They're in danger of losing control when they perceive other people as being incompetent or just always pushing to do things differently, to change, or constantly interrupting them. They like structure, they like order, they like details, they like to work to a plan. They're very self-sufficient, they're confident in their experiences. They feel good when things go to plan, when people follow procedures. They don't show their understanding of emotion of others, or they don't actually sometimes recognize the importance that emotions have on an individual and their experience of a situation. Quite forceful in making things happen, quite selective in their efforts in who they want to initiate and build relationships with. They build trust by kind of following the social rules. They seek to persuade with kind of logic and evidence, very much a no-nonsense kind of approach. And they tend to be more comfortable leading when they're in their areas of expertise. To the last chapter, just want to take a moment or two for you to reflect again upon those key components of emotional intelligence. And what I'd like to, you might like to think about which of the components you have finely tuned your skills in, and which areas there is perhaps developmental opportunities for you. Now, it may help you to assess your capability in each component as low, average, high. And perhaps due to the kind of time restrictions we've got today in the webinar, perhaps just focus on selecting one component which you really feel you excel in. And then you might want to identify a component which you believe could be a possible development opportunity for you. So I'll just give you a minute just to have a think about that. Everybody wants to kind of pop in chat what they think they kind of really excel at, or the development opportunity. Please feel free to kind of share. You don't have to. It's entirely up to you. It'd be quite nice to what people kind of think they excel at. What areas do you excel in? Emotional intelligence. Empathy and flexibility, social skills, brilliant. Self-regulation and motivation in room for improvement. Thanks, Abby, for sharing that. It's brilliant. You else want to put anything in there? Empathy and self-awareness. Yeah. My self-development area at the moment is tolerance. I have a real struggle sometimes with tolerance. Area I'm trying to work on. For sharing. Into our last chapter then. So when we're developing emotional, or we want to develop emotional intelligence, the starting point really is to identify your typical actions in each of the key component areas and assess your level. A little bit more in depth than we just did there. We use an assessment on that, but the areas which you rarely draw upon or have lower competency levels in, these would then be your potential kind of development opportunities if you were wanting to increase your overall level of emotional intelligence. On the next slide, I'll kind of share with you a few of the skills that you might like to use as your kind of starting point. But as well as practicing the skills that you would like to develop, it's also helpful to focus on how other people respond to you. Actually actively ask for feedback about your behavior, how other people perceive your actions, perceive your behaviors, and also really importantly, how do you leave them feeling at the end of that interaction? And that can provide a really useful source of information that you can then use to improve your performance and further develop your emotional intelligence. Just think about each one of the colour preferences. And I'm just going to give you a couple of kind of starting points for each one of these preferences. So if we start with the red, for example, now some of the kind of development kind of challenges, areas, could be for a red, could be self-awareness. It's around the empathy, that tolerance that I mentioned a minute ago, perhaps even flexibility to a degree, regulation, their well-being. So just a couple of kind of starting points there is reds can learn to use language that promotes constructive feedback, perhaps not quite as blunt and direct as their natural style usually is. So it's looking at taking into account the kind of how can they support the emotions and the reactions of other people. Another area is being more attentive to the needs of other people. You know, pay more actual attention to them when you're talking to them. Really listen to them, make eye contact, demonstrate that interest in what they're saying, in them as an individual. So if we think about yellow preference then, well, for yellow preferences, it's around kind of, again, empathy, achievement, tolerance perhaps, regulation, perhaps well-being, are all kind of possible areas that they may like to develop a little bit further. So here, what can we do? Well, it's about differentiating between when it's appropriate to focus on all that big picture, all those ideas, that innovation, tell those stories, and when in actual fact it is far more appropriate for the situation, for the people, to focus on the detail, to give more factual data. Another thing for the yellow preference is to actually, rather than, they can, because they are full of ideas and they just keep coming up with idea after idea, they really are the ideas people. But if constantly putting these ideas out to people, it can be quite overwhelming for people. So perhaps an area for them to focus on is, before they just throw out all these ideas at people and overwhelm people, is to think them through a little bit more and kind of try and sort them and prioritize the ideas and information. What are their key ideas that they want to get out there, and kind of more of a drip drip kind of effect feed, rather than throwing everything out there in a downpour altogether. If we then focus on our green development area, there, it's around that kind of flexibility, the achievement, the energy, the persuasiveness, their ability to lead. So here, again, a couple of starting points is learning to become more emotionally detached, be more objective in their evaluation of a situation, be more focused on the kind of the task, the achievement of the task. And it's also being able to differentiate between when it's an appropriate time for empathy, and when in actual fact somebody could do with a little bit of constructive feedback, and that would be a far more supportive and helpful kind of approach rather than the empathy. And last but not least, our blue preference. So for blues, it's all about that kind of that flexibility, the empathy again, the social skills, the tolerance, their ability to lead. And for them, a couple of development starting points here would be identifying feelings and emotions as actually useful pieces of information. Blues like detail, they like information, they like to be in the know, have the knowledge. So emotions and kind of feelings are not perceived naturally as kind of hard factual data, very subjective. And it's perhaps revisiting the way that we think about feelings and emotions, and actually seeing the value of having that inside kind of knowledge about people's feelings and emotions and their own feelings and emotions. It's also about opening up to different perspectives and being able to value those differences of opinions, different ways of doing things, different ideas. Another great development area perhaps for a blue. Any learning, it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes practice and it takes time. One thing I always say to people is, it really is worth remembering that people who have those higher levels of emotional intelligence in general lead happier, healthier, and more enjoyable, successful lives. They build stronger relationships, both at home and at work. And they just enjoy kind of greater satisfaction and just enjoy life to its full. And that for me is kind of the what's in it for me. Why should I bother to invest my time, my energy into developing a higher level of emotional intelligence? And that brings us towards to the end of today's webinar. First of all, thank you for joining us. If anybody has got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or if you prefer to drop me an email, please get in touch. My email's on screen there. A couple of upcoming events just to be aware of. You can join us on the 24th of November, where our webinar is going to be around fostering a psychologically safe environment. And we've also got for anybody who hasn't seen the jigsaw or would like to build their own jigsaw behavioural profile, then we have what we call the virtual jigsaw taster, which is coming up on the 14th of December. And if you visit our website, jigsawdiscoverytool.com, you'll see there's an events page there, and you can book either for the upcoming webinar or the virtual jigsaw taster. So with that, I'd say thank you once again for joining us. And if anybody has got any questions, I am very happy to take your questions now.